write your chapters 3 and 4. Hopefully everyone can hear me. So the outline is just what I spoke of. We're going to talk about, have a little introduction, and then talk about the methods section, the chapter, and your findings. So we took some questions prior to this webinar, and this slide will answer some of these questions that were asked of us. Qualitative dissertations, I'm going to talk throughout this webinar about the 5 common approaches. They're not all inclusive. These are not all of the qualitative dissertation approaches that you could use, but like the title says here, they're common approaches. So try to avoid using, I chose one of 5 approaches. They're not all the 5. So, but the common ones are narrative inquiry, phenomenology, case study, grounded theory, and ethnography. And when you would use those is narrative inquiry, you're going to use the narrative inquiry to tell a story, a life story of one or very few individuals, preferably prominent individuals. Phenomenology, if you want to tell the lived experiences of a group who have all shared the same lived experience with the phenomenon, that would be a good choice to use for phenomenology. A case study, if you want to do an in-depth exploration of a specific case, go for that, go for the case study. For grounded theory, if you're looking to develop a theory where there's only a partial theory in the literature and it really is inadequate and doesn't cover the complexities of the problem of the study, then a grounded theory would be in order. And ethnography, if you want to study the in-depth and describe and interpret a culture of individuals who typically live together and have lived together for quite a while, then ethnography is a good choice. But generally speaking, when to use qualitative design, you're going to explore, you're going to discover, you're going to understand a phenomenon, a process, a problem, an issue, versus a quantitative study where you're trying to prove a hypothesis, which is more of a deductive study than qualitative, which is more of an inductive design. When you want to talk about something, study something that's not easily measured, it's not really easy to measure someone's thoughts, someone's feelings, someone's experiences, the steps in a process, how something works, then a qualitative, that points to a more qualitative design. An important one is to hear silent voices, right? So this kind of takes into consideration the ontological notions connected to qualitative design, where it's more relativistic, so more of multiple truths versus quantitative, where there's a more realistic ontology, where there's one truth, right? And then to understand the context or settings where participants in a study address a problem or issue, like what happened here. That's context, very, very, very context specific is qualitative research. And like I said, for grounded theory, to develop those theories. And if you're studying interactions among individuals, then a qualitative design would work better. So another question that came in was, would it help to have an outline? So here's a potential outline that you may follow as you write chapter 3. Some universities will not include, say, limitations and delimitations in this specific chapter. Other universities will demand that they're in this chapter. So they might, and this order might not be what's preferred by your chair or your committee. Always remember that the boss here with this dissertation is your chair. So what I say here are tips, and they might not, your chair might not agree with how this is laid out, might not agree with everything. the terminology, etc. Follow your chair and your committee, since they are the people that are going to you're going to defend the dissertation to. But these are definitely components you will include within your dissertation. And if you have these down in paper or down on your computer in order to send to your committee, good. To your chair, good. If they want them changed around, that's a lot easier to change what you have written than to come up with these. So this hopefully will help you get to that point. So you'll start your chapter 3 with your introduction, and you may want to begin that with a restatement of the problem, because you're transitioning from chapter 2, the lengthy chapter 2 with your literature review. And you might want to just remind the reader of the problem that you define the need for, the gap in the literature for in chapter 2, or just start with the purpose of this chapter is to whatever. But your introduction will include the verbatim purpose statement and or your research questions. Some people, some committees will prefer, chairs will prefer the research questions reiterated in chapter 4. Others like them in the methods chapter. So, but you will want to include the verbatim purpose statement. And also, this goes for any academic writing that you're going to do. You want to overview the contents of the chapter, but any paper that you do for a scholarly paper is going to tell the reader what the content are of the specific paper or chapter, what they're going to look forward to reading in the rest of that chapter. So you're going to include a statement that identifies the research methodology and design. And hopefully that is included in your verbatim purpose statement. The purpose of this, let's say, qualitative interpretive phenomenology is to, so you're explaining what the methodology and the design is. The purpose of this qualitative constructivist grounded theory is to, so that will lead to your next section, which will be research methodology and design. So it's a great segue into that first section, a complete section past the introduction of this chapter 3. Remember that you're writing it in future tense for the proposal. So you intend to include 10 to 15 participants for your phenomenology for a proposal versus I interviewed 15 participants for this study, which would past tense for the final. But again, for all these tips today, refer to your chair first. That chair is your boss. So then we'll move to our section of research methodology and design. And it's going to be like a funnel. Think of a funnel. You go from broad to narrow. That's how you did in chapter 2 for your literature review. You went from broad concepts to the narrow that point more to your focus of your study. So you'll start with your chosen strategy of inquiry. Describe that. Why did you choose qualitative? Why is justify this? Why qualitative design is better than a quantitative design for your specific study? Why did you choose your specific qualitative approach to answer your research questions? Why was a case study chosen, and why is that better than others? That's your justification of the specific approach. And then do move in as you're following that funnel, that broad to narrow. Then you're going to move into that specific approach, and you're going to give good detail into it, because to show exactly who you're following, what design you're choosing. So offer a history a brief history. This doesn't have to be this is not the main focus of this chapter, but do give a little bit of a history of your chosen approach, offer the philosophical assumptions of that specific approach, particularly important if you chose a phenomenology, because phenomenology is a philosophy and a method. So anytime you write about a phenomenological study, it's imperative that you mention the philosophical assumptions connected to that. And then describe the purpose of that chosen approach and its characteristics. And some of these approaches have different types. So if you chose, say, a constructivist grounded theory, explain the type that you chose, and perhaps talk a little bit about the other types as well. If you chose a descriptive phenomenology, describe that descriptive phenomenology, cite the source of descriptive phenomenologists, right? So there's a thing called method slurring. You don't want to really have method slurring where you're citing a bunch of interpretive phenomenologists for your descriptive phenomenology study. It shows lack of rigor, to be honest, and people will notice that. And then explain why you chose your type for your study. Why is that the best choice? And then every one of us has our identity in some way connected to race, class, gender, sexuality, ability, status, and more, right? So how positionality is how others see us in the wider aspect of the social context, and how we ourselves see us, right? So that's an important part in our positionality. And this would be a section called positionality. It could also be called role of the researcher, whichever your school prefers. But so I'll give you an example. I was the faculty mentor for two students who were undergoing a study, and they were seeking IRB approval, and I signed for their IRB application. And it was a male, a white male, and a Black female who were conducting a study on white male, Black female sponsorship. So within their IRB application, they said that the white male would interview all the white males, the Black female would interview all the Black females, because they realized that their positionality might have something to do to impact data collection and analysis. So if someone sees me as the researcher, as an insider, they might open up to me. They might become more transparent to me, versus if they see me as an outsider, where they might be a little more standoffish, clam up a little bit. So they wrote that as part of their IRB application. So it shows how there's disadvantages and advantages to our positionality. But in qualitative research, a part of that positionality is understanding where we stand, who we are in the research, what our positions can somehow impact or bias our research. So here's Holmes. I like this quote. I like his article. I do advise you to look into that afterwards if you're interested in learning more about positionality. But he says, yet through exploring their positionality, the novice researcher increasingly becomes aware of areas where they may have potential bias, and over time are better able to identify these so that they may then take account of them. So how do we do that? How do we do that? Well, there's a process called reflexivity that we will be talking, that you would hopefully discuss a little bit in this positionality statement section of your dissertation of your chapter 3. So you're not going to have a section called reflexive journal, but you will keep a reflexive journal throughout your study. I've had students ask me, what is this journal? Do I have to journal every day? No, you don't have to journal every day. It's not like a Dear Diary, So, but you do have to be consistent. You have to do this throughout the study. And in this journal, you'll include things such as who you are, your identity, what your background is, what your upbringing is, what your beliefs are, your values, your biases, how connected you are to your research topic, what made you interested in this research topic. Keep all these in your reflexive journal. Also talk about those relationships with participants and that possible power differential that I spoke of, and the insider-outsider aspect that I just spoke of earlier, and include how they might impact data collection and analysis.
Dr.
Now,
Patton,
I have those bolded.
Can I interject here? We have a question in the comment. Is the reflexive journal similar to memoing? Is the reflexive journal similar to memoing?
Very similar to memoing. In fact, I put it down there in this slide to bring that to your attention, that yes, it's not only associated with memoing, it's also associated with your audit trail. If you ever heard of an audit trail, that's part of your trustworthiness of the data that you're going to include. So this actually could be where you conduct your memoing. This could be where you keep your audit trail. So just put everything in here and in one place. Or, I mean, this is a creative process, your qualitative if you feel like you need to put your decisions, your audit trail in one space, and how you're reflexively considering your biases somewhere else, whatever, just so you have it written down or typed in somewhere, that it is a process throughout the entire study. It's not just something you think of as you're doing the design, or something that you say, oh, I'm doing data collection, I have to practice reflexivity now. It's on a continuum here. But those 3 in bold are what you would write in your positionality statement, in your positionality section of the dissertation. So you will write your potential biases. You'll write your a bit about your identity. You're going to write about the relationship and how they might impact, and what you're going to do about that. What you won't write in the chapter, but you will have written in your journal, is a record of your study decisions. You make so many decisions throughout your qualitative research study, and really they have to be justified, and how you came about those decisions and how you feel about them could be written in your journal. Anything you're anxious, confused about with the study, how you're making meaning from the data, again, that's part of memoing. Another part of memoing is your evolving perceptions of the study. So yes, it is. To answer your question in a long-winded way, yes, it's connected to memoing. Now, another section that you'll have is your participant selection and sampling. So you're going to have certain criteria that show who you want to best answer your research questions. Try and keep it to try to keep those criteria to 3 or fewer, and list them separately, but they all will help the reader know who was eligible to take part in your study. It will also help when you recruit your participants, who understands that you could read these and say, oh yes, I am eligible for this study because, say, in a COVID study I did, I had New York nurses who were working with COVID patients in the height of the pandemic. So a few of the participant selection criteria were US nurses working in a full-time or part-time role. These nurses would have, number two, had to have had patient care contact with COVID-19 positive patients, and they would have had to work, perform this work during the height of the pandemic in New York. So these people could read these three and know if I'm eligible, and the reader of the chapter will know that, oh, this is who you included. And another, what you would include in this section, explain how you chose an organization or a program, if that's applicable. So say you're conducting an organizational case study, then you would explain how you chose those organizations. Or if you are looking at the benefits and challenges of a specific leadership development program, you're going to describe how you chose that program. And please do try to look to the literature to defend your sample size. So you're going to be explaining what with your proposal, how many you hope to obtain for your sample size. And do remember that a dissertation is a robust study, so it would be on the higher end. And it's a proposal, so this is the ideal. You want a certain amount. Do give a range for your proposal rather than a specific amount. And again, tie it to the literature. Find some numbers by an expert in qualitative, preferably your design, that supports the number that you and your committee have agreed upon that's the best for your study. And you're going to explain how you identify, you contact, and you recruited or will recruit your participants. Be extremely detailed about this. Are you using LinkedIn? Are you using hanging flyers? Whatever you're going to do, write that clearly. And you may include a participant table in this section. So as you're talking about it, we're talking about for the actual dissertation, not the proposal. You don't know your participant table at that point. But when you're finished, you could either include this in chapter 3. I've seen it both in chapter 3. I've seen some people put it in chapter 4. It's however it flows best with your paper. And do include that they're pseudonyms, that these names are pseudonyms, because you promised this confidentiality in your IRB application. And don't just mention it in the text, but do mention it in the text and mention it in that table that they're pseudonyms, so that the reader can easily understand that, oh, these aren't the actual names of these participants. I love Cresswell and Potts tables. And for anyone who's not familiar with Cresswell and Potts, it's this book here. I do recommend it. They're very helpful. The tables are especially helpful. I believe that everybody should refer to them throughout if they're writing their first, their dissertation. And this table shows what data collection methods are best suitable for each of these 5 common approaches. So for narrative, primarily interviews and documents, but really I feel that they should have added also observations or some kind of shadowing, because narrative, you're getting someone's life story, right? And you're doing it on a few individuals. So many times this involves really shadowing this person and getting the most possible information you can about their stories. Phenomenology, again, primarily interviews with individuals, although you can triangulate using documents, observations, and art. Grounded theory is primarily interviews with data collection, and it could range from 20 to 60 individuals. You're truly looking for data saturation at this point with grounded theory. Do mention about theoretical sampling in probably the sampling section that you are, which is unique to grounded theory. The theoretical sampling is when you have already interviewed some people and you are starting to discover a theory, come up with a theory, but you want to make sure that this theory is really truly grounded in quality data. So you will the theoretical sampling aspect is when you are going to find more participants who can either debunk or support this theory that's starting to evolve. Ethnography, primarily observations and interviews, but certainly other sources, because you are in this process. It's the longest process of all 5. It entails in-depth field work where you could be in the field for anywhere from many months to many years. So it's very the most time consuming of the 5. Case study, important to use multiple sources such as interviews, observations, documents, and artifacts. So I obviously mentioned interviews as a data collection method in each and every one of those approaches. And someone had asked about how many interview questions, and they said something about open-ended survey. So that's not a recommendation. It's certainly not a best practice for qualitative research. Actual interviews are the best practice to conduct data collection with qualitative research. So what is not recommended is written in red here, where there's a formal, strict set of questions. They're written in a specific order. They're asked in a specific order. They're read word for word. You cannot add any questions. You will not add questions for clarity, for probing, no adjusting for language if there's possibly some language barrier due to age or mental capacity, or just someone whose English is not their first language. That would be called an interview schedule, and that's more used for like market research. It's not how we can gather in-depth, rich, thick data that we need for a qualitative study. So most often are the semi-structured interviews, because when you apply for your IRB application, your IRB approval, you will be asked to attach some of the interview questions. So so you do have some questions composed already. Plus, it's a novice researcher, it's probably the best way to go, where you have some composed questions. We got a question about how many for an interview guide. I'm going to say approximately 10 to 15. That could vary, of course. It depends on your topic. It depends on a lot of things, but let's just say 10 to 15 to start. But they could be asked during the interview in a very flexible order. Whatever comes out from your participant, who is the expert here in qualitative research, you are learning from the participant. You're discovering, you're understanding, you're exploring, because they know and you're interested in learning. You can add questions along the way, again, for clarity. Perhaps they went off on a direction that you never even thought of prior to this. Add some more questions with that. And you can adapt for language. And then there's an unstructured or informal, also called open interview, where you just go to this interview with a set of general topics. So you don't have any questions composed ahead of time. Obviously, you can adjust for language and there's no wording or order. So because you're generating those questions on site. So say I'm doing a study on healthcare conflict in the workplace, I could just start it off with, hey, tell me what you have experienced about workplace conflict in your job. So, but if whatever you do, mention what type of interview. So probably semi-structured. I've seen this, people melding different words to describe their interview. Keep it consistent and keep it either semi-structured or informal. So here's what you're going to write about in the data collection section. You want to write where you'll collect the data, how you'll record the data. Someone asked about what's the best way to record your data. There's so many different ways that you can use your phone, the recording app on your phone. You could use a recording device. You could use Zoom to record it, but please take my tip here and use a backup. Brinkman and Kavala, it's a good book on interviews. Here it is, actually. Great book if you want to learn more about interviews, but they say to use a backup. I was very fortunate that I took that advice as a candidate who was doing my dissertation, because at one point my one recorder, my favorite recorder, somehow decided to stop, and I had this backup. So I would have lost that entire interview because I wasn't writing every single detail about that interview. I was depending upon my 2 recording devices. You'll also write about how the study's going to end. Here you could talk about data saturation when your interviews are not producing any more gained knowledge. What are the participants expected to do during and after the data collection? So here you'll talk about like how many interviews you intend to conduct. Typically for a phenomenology, you're going to conduct more like 3 interviews, where as opposed to maybe a grounded theory where you're going to collect maybe 1 interview per individual, per participant. How long you think these interviews will last? Final dissertation. Typically, your initial interview is a little longer than the subsequent follow-up interviews. Whether they're going to be asked to do a transcript review or member checking. Include all this. If you're going to have observation, what in particular are you going to be looking for as you observe? So all of these will be included in this section. Think of this chapter as you're holding the reader's hand so that they can understand exactly in detail what was done. Don't leave anything. And it is difficult. It's nice to have kind of this in front of you, because it is difficult, because it comes so commonplace to you that you tend to think that everyone knows what you've done, but it's a very detailed writing experience. And then you are going to talk about this is another section, data analysis. So be very detailed. How exactly will you be analyzing your data? Here is an important, well, they all are important sections, to cite the experts on your specific approach. So say you're conducting a Straussian grounded theory, then you're going to be talking about open coding, axial coding, and selective coding, and citing Strauss and Corbin, or Corbin and Strauss throughout. Thoroughly describe in detail every single step, and explain that coding process, how you say you're conducting thematic coding, how you started by reading and rereading your transcripts, and then starting to pick selective words or phrases as codes, how you combined, how you looked at these codes and created categories for similar codes and put them together, and how then you looked at those categories and came up with the themes. Explain about your computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software, whatever it is. Someone asked prior to the webinar which to choose. It's a personal preference. It's also honestly, your school might, at some schools, I know of some schools that will provide certain QDAS for their students. So one school has en vivo available to their candidates. I have used Atlas TI. I now am sold on Deduce. It's cloud software, so actually you could share your coding with your chair. However, if you do that, you have to keep in mind that in your data, your IRB application that you mentioned, because it's going to ask who will have access to your data, do mention that you might at times share your Deduce with your chair. So another section now, schools that demand this to be a section in chapter 3, others will put the limitations in. Candidates will put the limitations within this chapter and then mention them again in the final chapter of your dissertation. Again, it varies. Consult your chair, your committee. But many candidates confuse the two, and there's differences between limitations and delimitations. So please keep in mind that limitations are things that are outside of your control as the researcher, but they can threaten the study's quality. So I know I wanted to have an equal number of males and females in my one study, and I was not able to do so. Try as I might to recruit more males, I got more females to take part in my study than males. I tried. It's outside my control. I can't force someone to be a participant. That's unethical. So that's a limitation of the study. Someone drops out of your study, you can't control that. You didn't want them to drop out. Again, they have the right to withdraw. It's an ethical consideration. It's their right. And that it's self-reported data. Don't mention small sample size as a limitation of your qualitative study. It's actually an epistemological underpinning of the study, and it's not considered a study weakness for a qualitative dissertation. Delimitations are choices that you make. It's totally in your control. You made these choices. You made these decisions. I needed to bound my study. I can't just open it up and go down a million rabbit holes. I need to bound my study by topic. I chose this design for a specific reason. I chose these participants to include in my study and exclude others. And you have to justify those choices. This is a great place to do it in the delimitation section. You have to have a reason for the fencing you put around your study. And then there's going to be a section here. Yeah. Did I hear?
Can I just jump in here a bit? I know there are some questions and I don't know how much more you have. How many more slides can we interject or stop for a bit? It's
sure.
43.
Oh, wow. Okay. Time flies.
Yeah, what would you prefer? Would you like me to ask us to take some questions or?
Let me finish chapter 3 because chapter 4 is so creative and dependent on your findings. I'll just finish up to chapter 3 here.
Okay, good.
So you will include this section on trustworthiness of the data or data rigor, and that you will use these terms: credibility, transferability, dependability, and confirmability. Do not use quantitative equivalent for these, and so avoid the use of internal validity, external validity, or generalizability, reliability. So they are connected with quantitative research instead. So how do you go about showing that you looked for the quality to increase the quality of your study through truth value? It would involve one of these strategies: prolonged engagement in the field for ethnography, triangulation, meaning multiple sources of multiple data collection methods. Transcript review is where you give the transcripts back to your participants for review to see if they want anything deleted, or if maybe they said something that they really meant something else. I've had both happen to me, where the participants wanted things changed. Member checks, I've seen this confused with transcript review very, very, very often. A member checking is actually when, after the fact, when you have analyzed the data and you share your analysis with participants, a few participants, and see if what you have come up with, they concur. Time sampling is more to do with observation, where you're looking to see if something happens within a specific number of time. Transferability, how it would be applicable to other contexts. Now, Lincoln and Guba say it's not up to you to determine the transferability. You just have to give enough information that reader, that's their responsibility to say whether it could be applicable to their context. So provide thick description and explain your purpose of sampling. For dependability, create that audit trail, which you could just throw into your reflexive journal. Code recode strategy. So you start to code, you step away, you recode the same thing, see if you come up with the same codes. If not, maybe rethink your codes. Triangulation we talked about. And describe clearly and in detail your methods and your analysis procedure. And confirmability, which is neutrality. You want to show that you tried your best to limit your biases. Triangulation, again, is included in that, and your reflexive journal. Then you go to your ethical considerations. This is your final section before your summary. Many people, because they're reading journals, articles throughout their entire program, see that in these small journal articles, it says for their ethical consideration, IRB approval was granted. Well, that's not enough for your dissertation section study with your ethical consideration section. Do understand the difference among privacy, confidentiality, and anonymity. As in qualitative research, you can't guarantee anonymity. There is not anonymity. You're purposely choosing these participants. You know who they are. You're getting informed consent from them. Anonymity is more of a Qualtrics survey for a quantitative study where there's no link to an IP address. You can't figure out who this is. They're anonymous. Privacy is when you are collecting the data. So that you want to keep the information private as you're collecting the data, as you're conducting the interview, whatever. Confidentiality is what you do with the information once you have collected it. So confidentiality has more to do with how you store data storage and how you write up the article and keep those participants confidential so that people can't read and have deductive disclosure, which you could figure out, like if you conduct a study in a small town, the participants could figure out or the readers can figure out who the participants are. That's actually has been quoted in the literature. Informed consent, you may want to attach an appendix in your appendix, the consent form, but you'll be mentioning it, and the right to withdraw for those participants, whether you have compensated your participants for taking part in your study. You're certainly not, you don't have to do that, but if you did, you're going to talk about it and how much, how you compensated them. Talk about the benefits and risks that the participants will have by taking part in your study. And talk about that data storage. If you have hard copies of anything, are you going to keep it in a locked cabinet? Are you going to keep it in a locked office? Your computer, is it password protected, and how that's stored? And then how you're going to, how and when you're going to destroy your data. And then you'll end with the summary. So let's take those questions.
Okay, thank you, thank you, thank you. So Tiffany had a question. Oh no, I think Tiffany had to go to a class. I'm just going back to the questions. There was one earlier. And I was thinking, Josh, if he's still here, Josh, do you want to ask your question? Josh Broward. Go ahead.
Oh my gosh.
Turn your mic on.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering about, it's possible that I'll have more participants than I need. And